On the evening of March 19th, 1983, a 19-year-old woman walked westbound along 5 Mile Road in Redford Township, Michigan. The sun had already set. The temperature hovered near freezing. She was alone. Between 7:30 and 9:30 that evening, someone saw her walking near Lola Park, a small green space tucked into the suburban grid of this working-class Detroit suburb. That was the last time anyone saw Christina Lynn Castiglione alive. 10 days later, her body was found in a remote wooded area more than 40 miles away. She had been strangled to death and sexually assaulted. And for the next 40 years, no one could say who had done this to her. This is her story, Redford Township. To understand what happened to Christina Castiglione, you need to understand this place. Redford sits on the western edge of Detroit in Wayne County, Michigan. Not quite the city, not quite the country. An inner ring suburb that grew up in the shadow of the automobile industry, its neighborhoods filled with modest brick homes, chain-link fences, and families who worked with their hands. By 1983, Redford was home to roughly 54,000 people. It was the kind of place where you knew your neighbors, where kids played in the street until the porch lights came on, where the rhythms of life followed the factory shifts at the Ford and General Motors plants a few miles away. 5 Mile Road cuts east to west through the township, a main artery connecting Redford to the neighboring suburbs of Livonia and Dearborn Heights. It was a road of strip malls and gas stations, of churches and auto repair shops, the commercial spine of a community that defined itself by hard work and modest expectations. Lola Park sits just off 5 Mile, a modest neighborhood park with ball fields and walking paths. In the daytime, it was a gathering place for families and teenagers. In the evening in March, with snow still on the ground and the Michigan winter not quite finished, it was quiet, dark. The streetlights cast yellow pools on the sidewalk, and beyond them, the shadows stretched long and deep, the kind of place where a person walking alone might not attract much attention, or might attract exactly the wrong kind. Christina Lynn Castiglione lived with her mother and father in Redford Township. She was 19 years old. She had graduated from Redford Union High School, where she had been active in sports. She was the kind of young woman who was building her life piece by piece, doing things the right way. After high school, she took a job at the Detroit Edison Company, working as a clerk in the research department. It was steady, respectable work, the kind of job that gave a young person a foothold in the world. She was not married, but she had a steady boyfriend. She had recently contacted an Army recruiter, exploring the possibility of military service. She was thinking about her future, making plans, looking ahead. Those who knew her described Christina as cheerful and friendly, but not outgoing. She was a nice person, quiet in the way that some people are quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because they choose their moments carefully. She was 19 years old, and she had every reason to believe that the life stretching out before her would be long and full and good. On Saturday evening, March 19th, 1983, Christina left her home. The exact circumstances of why she was walking along 5 Mile Road that evening are not entirely clear. What is known is that she was seen walking westbound on 5 Mile Road near Lola Park sometime between 7:30 and 9:30 in the evening. The March air was cold. The streets were not crowded. She was walking alone. And then she was gone. 2 days later, on Monday, March 21st, Christina's mother reported her missing to the Redford Township Police. A 19-year-old girl who had not come home, who had not called, who had simply vanished from a suburban street on a Saturday night. The police began their search. They canvassed the neighborhood. They spoke to friends, family, co-workers. They looked for any trace of where Christina might have gone. They found nothing. 8 days passed. On March 29th, 1983, the Livingston County Sheriff's Office received a call. A body had been found in the Oak Grove State Game Area on Fawcett Road in Deerfield Township. The game area was a sprawling expanse of state-managed woodland covering nearly 2,500 acres in Livingston County, roughly 40 to 50 miles northwest of Redford Township. It was remote, isolated. The kind of place where hunters tracked deer in the fall and hikers disappeared into the trees in the summer. In late March, with the snow still melting, it was desolate, empty, the perfect place to hide something you did not want found. Deputies arrived and made their way into the woods along Fawcett Road. What they found would mark this stretch of forest forever. The body of a young woman lay in a remote section of the woods. She was partially clothed, lying among the dead leaves and bare trees of a Michigan winter that had not yet released its grip. The heavy snowfall that had blanketed the area in the days following her disappearance had covered her body completely, concealing it from view for more than a week. As the temperatures climbed and the late March thaw set in, the snow melted and her remains were revealed. Evidence at the scene indicated that the body had been placed there shortly after Christina disappeared, before the snowfall came. Whoever had done this had driven her far from home, deep into the countryside, and left her in a place where discovery would be slow and difficult. The medical examiner's findings were devastating. Christina Castiglione had been sexually assaulted. She had been strangled to death. Someone had taken her from a suburban street in Redford Township, driven her more than 40 miles into the rural wilderness of Livingston County, assaulted her, killed her, and left her body in the woods like she meant nothing. During the autopsy, the medical examiner recovered male DNA from Christina's body. In 1983, this evidence was biological gold, but the technology to analyze it did not yet exist. DNA profiling was still years away from being developed as a forensic tool. The evidence was carefully collected and preserved. It would wait. For decades, it would wait. The Livingston County Sheriff's Office launched a full murder investigation. Detectives worked the case with the tools and technology available to them in 1983. They interviewed witnesses. They followed leads. They searched for connections between Christina and anyone who might have wanted to harm her. But Christina Castiglione was not the kind of person who had enemies. She was a quiet, friendly young woman who went to work and came home and was building a life. There was no obvious motive, no obvious suspect, no trail to follow. The investigation stalled. The weeks became months. The months became years. The case file grew thicker with dead ends and unanswered questions, and eventually, inevitably, it went cold. The detectives who had worked it moved on to other cases, other tragedies, other families in need of answers. But Christina's family could not move on. They were left with the worst kind of grief, the kind that has no resolution, no answers, no justice. Just silence. The phone that never rang with news. The knock on the door that never came. Year after year of silence, stretching across the 1980s, the 1990s, into a new century. The world changed around them, but the question remained the same. Who killed Christina? In the early 2000s, nearly 20 years after Christina's murder, a glimmer of hope appeared. The Michigan State Police Crime Lab took the preserved DNA evidence from the case and entered it into CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, the FBI's national database of DNA profiles from convicted offenders and crime scenes across the country. The database contained hundreds of thousands of profiles. If the killer had ever been convicted of a qualifying offense, if his DNA had ever been collected and entered into the system, there would be a match. Investigators waited. The results came back. No match. The man who had killed Christina Castiglione had never been entered into the database. He had slipped through the cracks of the criminal justice system, committing crimes without ever being required to provide a DNA sample. Another dead end. More silence. But the evidence was still there. Still preserved, still holding its secret, still waiting for the right question to be asked of it. In 2009, the Livingston County Sheriff's Office did something that would eventually change everything. They established a cold case unit. The unit was staffed not by active duty detectives, but by retired law enforcement officers who volunteered their time and expertise to re-examine unsolved cases. These were men and women who had spent their careers investigating crimes, who understood the patience and persistence required to solve the cases that other people had given up on. They adopted Christina's case. They reviewed the original investigation. They re-examined the evidence. And they waited for technology to catch up with the crime. In March of 2022, the Cold Case Unit applied for and received grant funding through Season of Justice, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing financial resources for advanced DNA testing in cold cases. The grant gave investigators the resources they needed to take the next step. In May of 2022, the preserved forensic DNA evidence from Christina's case was sent to Othram Inc, a forensic laboratory in Houston, Texas, that specializes in a cutting-edge technique called Forensic-Grade Genome Sequencing. Where traditional DNA analysis looks at a limited number of genetic markers, Othram's technology can extract a comprehensive genetic profile from even degraded or limited samples. the kind of samples that have been sitting in evidence storage for 40 years. Othram scientists went to work. They built a detailed genealogical profile from the unknown male DNA recovered from Christina's body in 1983. Then their in-house genealogy team took that profile and began searching public genealogy databases, the same databases where ordinary people submit their DNA to learn about their ancestry and find distant relatives. The system identified partial matches with distant relatives of the unknown suspect. From there, the genealogists began building family trees, tracing bloodlines through generations, narrowing the field of possibilities. The trail led to a name: Charles David Shaw. Charles David Shaw was born on April 16, 1956. He grew up in the western suburbs of Detroit. He was a longtime resident of Livonia, Michigan, the suburb that sits directly adjacent to Redford Township. He lived less than 5 miles from where Christina Castiglione was last seen walking along 5 Mile Road. Less than 5 miles. Close enough to drive in minutes. Close enough to know the streets, the parks, the rhythms of the neighborhood. Close enough to see a young woman walking alone on a cold March evening and make a decision that would destroy her life and haunt her family for 4 decades. But Charles David Shaw was dead. He had been dead since November 27, 1983, just 8 months after he murdered Christina. He was found dead in Detroit at the age of 27. The medical examiner ruled his death accidental sexual asphyxiation. Because Shaw was deceased, investigators could not obtain his DNA directly. Instead, they turned to his living relatives. Through the cooperation of Shaw's family, investigators obtained DNA samples for comparison. The results were definitive. 3 separate familial DNA comparison tests confirmed that Charles David Shaw was the source of the male DNA found on Christina Castiglione's body. 3 tests, 3 confirmations, there was no doubt. The Livingston County Sheriff's Office later stated that the cooperation of the Shaw family during the investigation was paramount to identifying Charles Shaw as the person responsible for the homicide of Christina Castiglione. Shaw's family painted a disturbing portrait of the man. They described him as a sex addict with a disturbing life who struggled with mental illness. He had multiple interactions with law enforcement that began when he was young and escalated over the years. In 1973, he faced a breaking and entering complaint in Livonia. In 1977, he was arrested by Livonia police for drug possession. In 1981, 2 years before Christina's murder, Shaw was arrested for the attempted abduction of a woman in the parking lot of a McDonald's restaurant in Fowlerville, Michigan. He pleaded guilty to a lesser charge and served just 2 weeks in jail, followed by probation. 2 weeks. For trying to abduct a woman from a parking lot. In 1982, he was arrested again, this time for stealing women's shoes from a Kmart store in Livonia. The pattern is unmistakable. A man with escalating criminal behavior, moving from property crimes to attempted abduction to murder. Each step darker than the last. Each consequence lighter than it should have been. And at the end of that escalation, a 19-year-old woman was dead. But Christina Castiglione was not Charles David Shaw's only victim. After Shaw was identified as Christina's killer, his DNA profile was uploaded into CODIS, and this time there was a match. Shaw's DNA connected to evidence recovered from another cold case, the murder of 16-year-old Kimberly Louiselle of South Leon, Michigan. Kimberly was last seen on March 20th, 1982, near the intersection of 8 Mile and Merriman Roads in Livonia, the same city where Shaw lived. Her body was found nearly a month later, on April 14th, 1982, off a wooded trail in the Island Lake Recreation Area in Green Oak Township, nearly 20 miles from where she was last seen. Evidence suggested she had been held captive for approximately 3 weeks before being killed. In September of 2023, Michigan State Police, with the assistance of students from Michigan State University School of Criminal Justice, participating in a cold case internship, announced that they had connected Charles David Shaw to Kimberly Louiselle's murder. A single sperm cell, unnoticed among the evidence for 40 years, had been found and matched to Shaw's DNA profile. 2 young women, 2 murders, 1 predator. Both crimes committed within a year of each other. Both victims taken from the western suburbs of Detroit, both bodies found in remote wooded areas of Livingston County, miles from where they disappeared, hidden in the kind of wilderness where a body could lie undiscovered for weeks. The pattern was chilling in its consistency. Shaw knew these woods. He knew these roads. He knew how to make people disappear. And the man responsible died 8 months after his second known murder, at the age of 27, in circumstances that reflected the darkness of his nature. Investigators have stated that they are examining the possibility of additional victims. They have asked anyone with information about Charles David Shaw's criminal activity between 1970 and his death in 1983 to contact Michigan State Police. The question lingers. Were there others? In the decade between his first known contact with police in 1973 and his death in 1983, what else did Charles David Shaw do that has not yet been discovered? On February 22, 2023, Livingston County Sheriff Mike Murphy stood before cameras and microphones and announced that the murder of Christina Castiglione had been solved. 40 years after a 19-year-old woman walked along 5 Mile Road and never came home, her killer had a name. The volunteer investigators of the Cold Case Unit, the scientists at Othram, the advocates at Season of Justice, and the cooperation of a killer's own family had combined to do what 40 years of traditional investigation could not. They had identified the man who took Christina's life, but there would be no trial, no conviction, no prison sentence. No moment where a judge looked down from the bench and told Charles David Shaw exactly what he was. Shaw was beyond the reach of any earthly justice. He had died in 1983, the same year he committed his crime, and he had never spent a single day in prison for what he did to Christina Castiglione. The 2 weeks he served for attempting to abduct a woman from a parking lot remained the longest sentence he ever served. The system had failed to stop him when he could be stopped, and death had taken him before justice could. What remains is the truth. Christina Castiglione was a 19-year-old woman who graduated from high school, got a job, had a boyfriend, and was thinking about joining the army. She was cheerful and friendly. She was building a life. On a cold March evening in 1983, she walked along a suburban road near her home, and a man who lived less than 5 miles away took everything from her. Her family carried the weight of her unsolved murder for 4 decades. Her mother reported her missing and then spent the rest of her life waiting for answers. The DNA that was recovered from Christina's body in 1983 waited 40 years to speak. When it finally did, it spoke clearly. 3 tests. 3 confirmations. 1 name, Charles David Shaw. Christina Castiglione deserved a long life. She deserved to see where her plans would take her. She deserved to grow old, to look back on a life well lived, to be more than a cold case file in a county sheriff's office. She did not get any of that, but after 40 years, she got the one thing that was still possible. She got the truth. And the truth, however late it arrives, is something. It is the least we owe the dead. It is the thing that says, we did not forget you. We kept looking. And in the end, we found the answer. Her name was Christina Castiglione. She was 19 years old. And she is remembered